Welcome back to Before, During, and Beyond the Breach, sponsored by Verizon Enterprise Solutions on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Fornicola, and my guests today are Mike Denning, Vice President of Verizon's Global Security, and Brian Sarton, Managing Director of Verizon's Risk Team. Brian, in the last segment, you touched on the idea that those impacted by these sorts of attacks oftentimes think that it is some nameless, faceless entity or person from across the globe. But one of the things that the report pointed out was the idea of privilege abuse. Can you talk about that and the impact on cybersecurity?
Yeah, the impact is huge, and understanding is important. So that if you sort of try to generalize or characterize cyber attacks in some really basic buckets, you could say that you have external breaches that come from outside the victim through wireless across the internet, what have you. You have inside jobs involving employees, past or present, and partner breaches that involve connections and contractual arrangements that you have with certain third parties and vendors and what have you. And if you think of privilege abuse, it's one element that's common really to all of those. So inside jobs, of course, almost exclusively involve the abuse or misuse of privileges that are provided to an insider. In external breaches, irrespective of criminal motivation, once intrusion happens on an external breach and the adversary finds their way into your internal network, trying to gain privileges to misuse and exploit the privileges that are provided to certain legitimate accounts. That's what they do. And partner breaches, I think that's an easy one to assume. It's either the partner or someone else who misuses the partner's privileges. Yeah,
it's a great point. Mike, your thoughts?
I think we continue to see almost every breach has in common the compromised credentials of a privileged user, because they have to get to large sources of data to find that key element. And so, how they navigate to them, those means vary from breach to breach. But ultimately, they're all targeting that privileged user access, because that's how they get to the key data.
When you look at organizations or agencies that are doing it right and responding the right way, how are they ensuring that something like this won't happen again?
Won't happen again? Just like we do in the data breach report, you've got to look at that security failure and take some real hard lessons from it. What were the causal factors? What were, say, the errors and omissions on the victim side that ultimately paved the way for this? You've got to look at it in black and white. Get the attitudes and everything out of the way, and in particular, have a qualified third party who can give you a true expert look at this thing in an unbiased way, and take lessons from those, and of course execute on those lessons. Those are the best ways you can make sure this kind of thing can't happen again. Another thing you can do, of course, is read our data breach investigation report. It's 70 pages of fun weekend reading, but it's far cheaper than being suffering a breach.
I call this the "I got a guy" strategy, right? A lot of times, agencies or organizations say, "I got a guy who can do this." That's not practical. You can't be expert in all those things. And the person that architected your data architecture should not be also responsible for securing that data architecture. There's an inherent conflict of interest there. And so I think having some kind of a neutral party separation of that is always good. Also segmenting out the roles and responsibilities to say, okay, these are the people that build the applications and build the things that we're going to roll out for both internally and externally, and here's the people that are going to watch that, and make those separate organizations. I think consistently these lines get blurred, and when push comes to shove, they need to get that app out, or they need to release something in a timely manner, and some steps are skipped along the security chain, and that ultimately creates those seams in the defense, as I like to call it, is that those handoffs between those organizations create seams for the bad actors to penetrate.
It's a good analogy. We've talked today a couple of times about the number of breaches that we see in the headlines. What do we do going forward? And as a country, should we just expect that our information is out there or in the hands of a rogue actor at some point?
Unfortunately, I think that there's some truth in that, particularly certain kinds of information like personally identifiable data. It exists in so many places. If and when it does leak out, how could you even figure out where it came from? Now, certainly there are certain tools and tactics that different sectors have to deal with leaks of certain kinds of information. Payment card data is a great example. When those leaks happen, by and large, it's easy to detect the source of that breach. But there's a mindset. I think those that understand what smart security is these days have wised up to the fact that it's not just about breach prevention, that security breach is something that is all around us, and you live with it quite literally every day. So smart security is not about how you prevent it. It's about how you recognize and react to it in a reliable and effective manner.
Mike, your final thoughts?
It's a paradigm shift that I think we need to go on here, and it's almost an assumption that we've been breached, that the data is out there, and that's whether it's your personal information or if you're in the IT or security organizations of an agency. You want to act accordingly, act as if the perpetrators are already within your network, do a good job of mapping where your critical data is, do a good job of segregation of duties, do a good job of that 24/7 monitoring, whether you do it inside or outside. Someone needs to be actively monitoring your network at all times, so you take that active defense approach.
That's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank my guests, Mike Denning, Vice President of Verizon's Global Security, and Brian Sarton, Managing Director of Verizon's Risk Team, on Before, During, and Beyond the Breach, sponsored by Verizon Enterprise Solutions. I'm your host, Jason Fornicola, and you're listening to FederalNewsRadio.com and 1500 AM.